We want to make this work known to people in a position of power, authority, and means, so that they can see it for themselves. So in other words, what we here speaking about is, with the change of consciousness, rewriting the very incentive behind the very, very basic principles of why to be wealthy, what it means to be wealthy, what true wealth comprises of. And that is where consciousness is moving undoubtedly. Undoubtedly. It's without a shadow of a doubt, because it exercised the possibilities of what otherwise have been for quite some times as seemingly the only option. And it's in the nature of consciousness. When something exercises itself, exhausts itself, then it dissipates its energy. So another energy begins to rise now.
So during today's discourse, at the end, you brought up the monarchy, and you sort of, you answered my question from my first question from yesterday, which was great. And I have an idea on this, and I do agree with you. I've obviously ran into a lot of these characters in my life, and their main focus is on wealth preservation, control, and they have a lot of staying power in the world, right? And their offspring typically do something disruptive like tech, and then they go back into the family business, or they're put in places of power. So they are very embedded in the infrastructure. What I'm seeing now is that there's a big consciousness shift in allowing the creative class, which maybe includes you and I, right? Our world or my world of like hospitality and stuff like that. And if you can bring that activation and programming to the monarchy, quote unquote, and that allows for value creation, they'll let you in under the tent with them. But that's only because the pie gets bigger. So the house always wins, right? That's kind of like the context, the setup for the question. So how does or should a creative, and I ask you from also a career perspective, go into the system, man versus machine, and try to influence it? Or is this wishful thinking and that shouldn't even be a thought? Because it is very rigid and there's a lot of room for bend, and that's where the value is created. And then that's the gross side of it. And then on the more metaphysical side of it, what are the subtle energies or nuances that are going on? Because I feel like if you can figure that out, the rest is very easy.
So let's revisit this understanding that everything is carried out by certain agencies. So in other words, to give the first like a kind of an overview, for example, when we have spoken about the Pancha Brahmanas, the 5 faces of Shiva, right? These the 5 sacred actions of Shiva, right? Creation, sustenance, dissolution, concealment, and grace-revealing power of self-knowledge, self-revelation. So it goes very, very intricate from there. The intricacy is in that numerical way of how it all radiates. So all this, as it were, functions are carried out by specific qualities. We're having this very deep tantric internal understanding of events, of how anything is accomplished at any strata of creation. So whenever something, let's say, came into a particular formation, as we spoke about this field of pure potentialities where everything is available, wherever the attention goes, one way or another, it will then manifest itself into a particular form, and that will become, for the time being, a certain, let's say, kaleidoscopical pattern of life. Then, as soon as there are some tips begin to happen, like that kaleidoscope is being rotated, just slight shift, one little grain moves, it changes the whole ornament. It rearranges itself. But who carries it out is these powers, the Shaktis. You see? So, as we can speak about it in human language, the human level, where the changes come from, right? Who carries the changes? Do the changes happen at the top level? Or do the changes come from the bottom up? What influences what? Historians make very different propositions, right? What is moving and shaking energy when it comes to changes? There are some very extraordinary suggestions were made, some very poetic, some very audacious, some very interesting when we view global history. For example, we share that kind of more Eastern, right? I was born much further east. I was born in Uzbekistan. My mother is from Ukraine, so we share that. And you know that there is a lot of rewriting, since your parents probably told you, of the Russian history, per se, the global. Yeah, exactly. So there's a complete and utter before the Peter the Great, like why the certain decrees were created, why elders who were older than 300 were killed, right, by the secret decree, or not so secret, right? Why there was this forcible Europeization of, it's all kind of like coming to the light now. In the same way, this kind of things coming to the light, we observe in many other parts of the world. It's like there's a great, we could say, awakening happening in North America, in the United States in particular, where you are now. This reevaluation of history, reevaluation, not just, let's say, the deep-rooted conflicts, karmic repercussions of the slavery, karmic repercussions of the way the land was taken from the indigenous cultures. All this is now being reevaluated, this kind of, right? This reevaluation is still very cautious. I would say, I don't want to call them superficial, it will not be fair, but they're not deep enough. They're not digging deep enough.
They just open the can of worms.
Yes, exactly.
Just a little.
Yeah, just a little bit, just like, sort of not to upset anyone, sort of, because enough that the air is already volatile. It smells of gunpowder. Enough. So, but what is happening? What is happening? What is happening is a lot of things come to light. Everyone agrees with that. Suddenly, what was inconceivable just 20 years ago, and what 20 years? Nothing. Just one generation coming to light. So this in itself is the result of certain energies engage in work. So these operating powers, these Shaktis, these impulses of creative intelligence, this, as it were, busy rolling up the sleeves, those who are ninjas, those who really bring the changes. These are the powerful Shaktis. This is the way. You see, it's like Shiva doesn't do anything, doesn't move a finger. Every aspect is carried out. Even the 5 faces of Shiva, creation, sustenance, dissolution, concealing his own nature and revealing his own nature, all carried out by Shaktis. It's a tantric perspective. And not just some kind of like just Shaktis, this Shakti, that, no, precise number, precise function, well structured, well executed, well administered. What happens at a more superficial level is that certain energies gain the momentum. And whatever gained the momentum has the trajectory as an arrow shot. It will fly. It will eventually either hit the target or it will dissipate and fall down. We can even calculate that. This is how the first arterially, art of arterially, arterially was, all calculated, right? It's just like here, that's a little bit here, a little bit here. Now that will hit the target. All based on the trajectory. So the trajectory has to go. I mean, it has to follow. In the same way, there's a trajectory of the unfoldment of certain energetic qualities that have been picked in the field. And then, obviously, it will be carried out by certain propensities, following certain propensities, but it will be carried out by the energies that are in charge of something particular that needs to be done, as it were, on the ground. So this is the picture beneath of what is happening at the surface level of even global human interactions, whether this is Mongol hordes just riding across the whole of the terrain, all the way, sucking Mecca, including going all the way to North Africa and as far as Budapest, going all the way to, like, unstoppable force. What were they looking for? They were not interested at all in land. Did they need Ukraine with its Chernozem? Do they need to grow the bread somewhere? These were nomads. The great sky, very different culture. I would recommend anyone to read Peter Kingsley's most brilliant book, The Arrow That Waiting to Pierce You, for which he basically killed his academic career because scholars just thought he'd gone mad. But it's the most interesting suggestions he made in that book. To me, he was very close to something really profound. But what's happening now in that whole revaluation of Russian history entirely, with the possibility even that has been for a long time entertained that Russian language is heirs to the Sanskrit because of all that potential that the Vedic culture was, as far as taiga, Siberia, modern Ural Mountains, all that, right? All this is coming to the light and something is changing, shifting. So we are indeed living at the end of, truly at the end of the epoch, at the end of the era. So these changes are coming of which we touched upon, that at the conversational level and where it seems the power displaying itself in most obvious way. In fact, it's the display of the power that has no trajectory left anymore. It's simply a display of something which has ended. So it needs to ascertain itself in the grandiosity. You see, the grandiosity of the project needs to be there. And the more grandiose, the more it feels like it will unite people. It will not. It will not. The return of the Trump to the office is a very interesting affair, energetically speaking. Again, a lot of things coming to the light now. And in that, what is being formed, woven right now, is the possibility of what will actually take place, perhaps for a prolonged period of time, where we kind of have no other choice other than straighten up our act. So in other words, another possibility will be exercised in consciousness. And those who see that, tap into that, that's where the greatest energy right now. Even if it doesn't display itself in a readily available, let's say, cash. Even if it doesn't display itself. Have you heard the name of this German gentleman who was known at some point? He had a nickname. He was like, he's a billionaire. He bought a land above the Getty Museum in LA, a huge piece of land. This was going back 10 years ago, where he said, Michael, remember we talked about it. Where's Michael? Remember? We talked about it in California. Sharon Miller wanted to even write to him. He was like, he basically said that the only investment it makes sense to make today is towards ideas. He felt that the future equity, the real value, is only in ideas in the time of the vacuum of ideologies. We live in the time where there's no ideas. Every idea exercised itself fully, and we're living at the end of it. Philosophically speaking, religiously speaking, in terms of geopolitical ideas, we live at the end of all ideas. It's a true dusk situation. It's a true end of the era. And this, I thought, wow, this is extraordinary. This guy out there with billions, he's even established a prize, $1 million for ideas. You see, and she felt that we should submit. Yep. Which one? Berggruen? Yes, Berggruen. Well done, Michael. You rock, man. You rock, absolutely rock. Yeah, that's the guy. He had the nickname homeless millionaire, homeless billionaire, because he was constantly living in the hotels. He was like, So this simple inclusion here in this, right, in this conversation, is because that in itself showed something. I don't know what happened to him. I don't know if he ran out of enthusiasm, ran out of gunpowder, ran out of what have you, because I haven't heard much about what's happening there. But at the time, it was making a lot of waves. You see, one thing was certainly interesting in how he spoke about that, and what felt compelling in this, that it had that distinctive flavor of that true shift towards a completely different dimension of what we understand to be the generally shared conversation. You see, I think maybe people cannot take him seriously because everyone just wants that, everyone wants to have MMA, UFC fights, everyone wants to have Dana, and everyone wants to have princes, and everyone wants to have oil and the horses and all this stuff. But basically, it's just regurgitation of the same thing. Yes, it's fantastic. It's beautiful, but it's bereft of anything. Anything. There's no novelty in that. There's no creativity in that. There's absolutely, it doesn't take us anyway. It doesn't create new story. It doesn't rewrite. It doesn't bring back mythology, let alone create new mythology. And this is what's happening now. We have to create new mythology. So what's happening in this room and in this work into second decade now is exactly that. Because we directly here partake in the process of reawakening and rekindling of those Shaktis that went underground. Because there was no food for them, they were not propitiated, they were left without job, they were redundant. Just like class of samurai was redundant, and they ran on the bullets, to die in dignity. In the same way, the Shaktis were slaughtered, went underground, slaughtered. The resonance that you felt, right, is coming because you're sensing that what we're speaking about now.
Agreed. I mean, it's funny you mentioned UFC and all of that stuff, and my firm actually did the big merger for them, and so I've been pretty close to all of these things, and I look at it as cheap entertainment, the Colosseums during Rome, the nation's collapsing and we're all watching.
Of course, yeah.
People fight, and it's all fabricated.
Yes.
But it's $1 billion plus enterprise.
Yes, very much so.
Why are we so easily influenced, and why are we such consumers? So that brings up kind of my next topic, where I cover hospitality, nightlife, entertainment, leisure. And I think that one of my big goals is to bring, maybe not this level, but some inkling of consciousness and spirituality into hospitality offerings and into finance itself. Maybe it's too noble of a goal, but I think that's really missing. How much UFC can we watch?
Well, it's a big topic, man. I see that David Lynch just passed away, right? And he was very passionate. He wanted to really had a global campaign, and he did a lot, like particularly going into the places of and underprivilege where it's most needed, into the wounds of society, for underprivileged children, for the people suffering PTSDs, and veterans working in prisons, all these programs, all this to bring consciousness-based methodologies to where it needed most. He used his everything, his own resources, his fame, his name, everything. And of course, he was deeply devotional to Maharishi's goal, ideas. He was really, really following. He clearly understood and spoke that. I was just now, during my dinner, watched a tribute made by the TM movement by Bob Roth with the presentation, some little insertions. I haven't finished because it's over an hour long, just with Tony Nader there. It's a tribute to David Lynch. And there's one particular talk which I remember in California in 2003, 2004, when he spoke. Audience was studied with, of course, celebrities interested in consciousness and meditation and in transformation of consciousness and of course lots of young people, and it was very interesting. The event was put last minute, and the way he spoke and to what he spoke. So what you're saying now, right? What you would like to see and you feel passionate about. The change can come only from the changed consciousness. So whatever to be brought, whatever to be implemented, would be brought by people whose consciousness is transformed. It cannot come just from, let's say, them understanding the value of it. The value can only be understood when that value is tasted for themselves. It's so straightforward and so simple. You see, it's also a conversation we have amongst ourselves in the background that we want to make this work known to people in a position of power, authority, and means, so that they can see it for themselves. So in other words, what we here speaking about is, with the change of consciousness, rewriting the very incentive behind the very, very basic principles of why to be wealthy, what it means to be wealthy, what true wealth comprises of. And that is where consciousness is moving undoubtedly. Undoubtedly. It's without a shadow of a doubt, because it exercised the possibilities of what otherwise have been for quite some times as seemingly the only option. And it's in the nature of consciousness. When something exercises itself, exhausts itself, then it dissipates its energy. So another energy begins to rise now. So this is a magnificent time to be alive. Yes, it's also challenging time to be alive. Challenging because we are depleted at the very, very fundamental level all the time. You see? So, yes, it's really like in a good thriller, like in a good drama, in a good tragedy. It reaches that point, right? That when the clock starts, and something needs to be done. Something needs to be done within that time when a crucial moment of alignment is taking place. Some speak about it like with the introduction of artificial intelligence, right, which is a misnomer, right? So the battle for humanity. And as far as I am aware, the battle for humanity has been an ongoing affair. It has always been. And that battle, it's not for humanity. It's not truly seeing it for what it is, even if it's okay to say that for people who need to hear it from that perspective. For people who need to hear it for that. The battle is always for consciousness, nothing else.